Welcome to Lions, Monkeys, Meth Labs, and James Bond, or The Art of Persuasion, Motivation, and Behavioral Change as part of MCOM 5366 Mass Communication Theory, led by Dr. Linda Daly of the College of Media and Communication at Texas Tech University, presented by Esteban Sosa. Now, this presentation contains a variety of complex concepts, and I've attempted to simplify them as much as possible so that even my mother would understand them. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Social cognitive theory. In short, humans are, well, complicated. We have an extraordinary capacity to shape and be shaped by our environment. This social system is a design of our own making. We are both products and producers of this environment, and we are influenced by our social system, by others, and by ourselves. Social cognitive theories encompass the acquisition of knowledge, the development of cognitive skills, and entirely new behaviors. We, as humans, continually adapt, develop, regulate, reflect, and act or react to this social system. That is part of what makes us uniquely human. Self-regulatory capability. Humans are driven by wants, needs, and desires. We set goals, those goals motivate us, and then we set even bigger goals. We develop a sense of morals through this process. Those morals reinforce who we are, what we believe, and how we act or react to our environment. Self-reflective capability. We observe, attempt, reflect, and change our individual course of action. We routinely observe others, those around us. We evaluate ideas with our peers, and we fact-check with peers for knowledge verification. Now, a warning related to self-reflective capability. Although we have great potential to develop our own ideas, we often reflect the environments in which we reside. Some would refer to this as drinking our own Kool-Aid. We naturally live, work, congregate, shop, dine, worship, etc. in the same social circles. That, however, is changing as we consume mass media on a global scale, and we react to the same issues with others around the entire world. In doing so, we are becoming less and less isolated. Observational learning. Now, humans are influenced by what we observe. That learned behavior is mirrored in our actions. We seek out behavior that is self-satisfying or rewarding in some way, and we reject behavior which we disapprove of. Now, a warning related to observational learning is that conflicts arise when what we believe is socially challenged by others. An example is a baker who refuses to bake a cake for a homosexual couple, or a dentist who posts pictures on Safari of a lion he killed and then receives backlash from society as a whole. Abstract modeling. We continually participate in problem-solving activities. We model behavior by referencing rules and deconstructing them for our own purpose. We consider existing norms. We seek to understand our audience and their unique needs. We improve upon our initial research in some method or manner. We create new, original ideas, and we tailor them to serve a very specific purpose. Humans are innovators in that we beg, steal, and borrow for our own needs. Acquisition and modification of affective proclivities. We are easily self-aroused by witnessing others react emotionally in some way. We experience fear, gratification, sorrow, etc. through others' reactions. It's the reason we feel warm and fuzzy inside by watching pictures or videos of cats on YouTube, or we are emotionally stressed when we witness a car crash. Observational learning. Our modeling behavior influences our motivation, both positively and negatively. For example, seeing your coworker or family member go back to school makes you consider going back to school yourself. Or seeing someone get a ticket for jaywalking makes you reconsider crossing in the middle of the street. This doesn't just apply to humans, though. On YouTube, there is a great example in which you can watch monkeys reacting to different rewards. If you have a second, I would suggest checking it out. Essentially, this tests the reaction when two monkeys are rewarded differently for the same task. One gets a grape and the other gets a cucumber, and that doesn't go over so well. So imagine for a moment if you were paid differently for the same exact task as a coworker. That probably wouldn't go over so well either. Now, a warning regarding observational learning. Humans are complex creatures. Sometimes modeling influence, like the glorification of violence, are used to justify other acts of violence. We are seeing more and more acts of violence in schools, for example. Kids may be becoming more and more violent, or they may be justifying their actions, referred to as moral justification, exonerative comparison, and euphemistic language. Say, for example, that a child is bullied to the point that they feel an overwhelming need to act. That action might be to retaliate against those who allowed the bullying to occur, and that violent action may even be justified in the mind of the victim as a way to prevent even more suffering. People are not always motivated to act. In groups, individuals may not object to a questionable decision or action simply because it is not their own decision, referred to as diffusion of responsibility. This means that bad decisions occur without individuals feeling responsible for them in any way. A current example is dehumanization practices, the removal of human qualities and replacement of them with negative stereotypes, which spread without others directly stopping them. Hitler utilized this approach when referring to Jewish people, and Donald Trump has utilized this approach when referring to Muslims or Mexicans. Combine dehumanization practices with attribution of blame to justify actions against others, and we get into very dangerous territory. Social construction of reality. Perception of reality can be influenced by heavy television viewing, and can be compounded by limited viewing to a single source of information like a specific channel or a specific news network. Your view of the world will be limited to one source if you do that, and not truly provide a realistic perspective of the world around you. As previously discussed in this course, the young and the elderly are especially susceptible to social construction of reality. Social prompting function. Our individual influence is achieved by our social status. Consider any product placement within a movie or television show you've seen. Let's consider James Bond for a moment. He represents extreme confidence, seduction, and status. Brands that aspire to the same qualities make sure James Bond drives their BMW, drinks from their martini, or wears their custom suit. Matching methodologies with media effects, the flow of influence. We consume mass media on a daily basis. Our social constructions may be impacted by this viewing. We might not match reality with the world around us in doing so. You may think that you'd never be driven to act based on what you see on a television screen, but don't be so fast to judge. At a sports game, for example, people succumb to social pressure to kiss on screen simply because a monitor is pointed at them. The media and those around us truly have the ability to influence our behavior. Essentially, media influence plus our social connection equals some sort of behavioral change. Some questions to ask are, do we watch so much violence that we become desensitized to it? Or do we see so many homeless people that we have learned to ignore the problem by simply ignoring them? An example on YouTube is a social experiment that demonstrates the desensitization effect with a homeless child. If you have a second, definitely go check this out, as you will see countless people pass by without giving it a second thought. Now, a warning regarding media effects and the flow of influence. We know that media can impact and influence behavior, so much so that the television show Breaking Bad has inspired a rise in meth labs around the world. An actual chemistry instructor was inspired to mimic the success of the show's main character, Walter White. Now, this may sound funny, But imagine if a television show demonstrated how easy it was to make a bomb, and how that might inspire others to attempt to do the same thing. Then it gets a little bit scarier. Adoption determinants. Adoption behavior considers trends, innovation, and the desire for social recognition or status. Consider a new car model that just came out this year. Now, when you first consider it, you envision how it would set you apart because it's like you, unique. Essentially, you'd feel special having something that others do not have. Then you might go out and buy that car, and then you start noticing that the same make and model is everywhere you go. What was once sought after and appealing has now become commonplace, and the status you once had, being an early adopter, somewhat diminishes. Now keep in mind that this loss of status will not happen immediately, and how fast or how slow it diminishes is based on how accessible that object is. If the car costs $100,000, the chances are you're still going to feel pretty special because not that many people can afford to buy that car. Likelihood model of persuasion. Mass media can be used as a tool to sway consumers. Every year, millions of dollars are spent with specific consumer outcomes in mind. Those desired outcomes might be to get you to vote a certain way, to get you to buy a certain product, to donate to a specific cause, to eat healthier, etc. In communication theory, this is referred to as the elaboration likelihood model of persuasion. Direct effects model. What happens if you have a captive, attentive, and gullible audience? Combine that with propaganda and you've easily made a direct effect on the people around you. An example is that there's an internet hoax that keeps going around saying that Bill Gates will give you $5,000 if you simply copy and paste this to your social media channels. Unfortunately, no matter what you do, Bill Gates is not going to give you $5,000. This is an example of propaganda and the impact it has on a captive, attentive, and gullible audience. Indirect effects model. Now, mass media doesn't automatically directly influence all attitudes, and not everyone directly consumes the same message. Key influencers may reinforce a message and indirectly impact the attitudes of others, however. Let's take the example and say that your boss reads a book. That book happens to influence your boss's thought process, and he or she leads changes in the organization because of that. Now, you didn't directly read that book, but you're being indirectly influenced by it by a thought leader within your organization. Communication persuasion matrix model of media effects. Mass media influence can be broken down into a sequence, and the following slide is a visual of such a matrix. It starts with a source. Somebody, somewhere out there, has something to say. They turn that into a carefully crafted message, which is then sent to you, the recipient, via a variety of channels, such as television or social media, where it's then placed in context with other things happening around the world. That's an example of communication persuasion model. Now, what happens when we receive a mass media message? The following slide is a visual to explain how consumers are persuaded. It starts with exposure, in this case, in this example, to television advertisement. That might contain something of interest, like a puppy that easily would distract us, and then that puppy, or the people in the advertisement, have some key message that we want to take away. Learning occurs. Then, at a later point, we retrieve that message, and it influences our actions, the results of which are either rewarded or we are embarrassed. That's an example of the persuasion model results. Elaboration likelihood model of persuasion, or ELM. This model focuses on yielding, an important step in persuasion. Now, this model is very confusing. So, in short, ELM is a yes-no model in which a predetermined path is followed. First, a person refers to prior knowledge. Based on that knowledge, a message is presented. The person has to systematically work through or process their prior knowledge and this new message that they're now receiving. Potentially, an attitude is changed or reinforced through this process. Now, people are complicated creatures, and ELM isn't exactly always a direct route. The process is complex because we, by design, are biased in our own experiences, prior knowledge, or our learned behavior. And we know that getting someone to change the way they think about a key issue can be very, very, very difficult, if not an indirect or peripheral route. Now, a warning regarding ELM is that changes in attitude or beliefs are not always possible, as we, humans, are stubborn. Let's take Uncle Bob, pictured to the right. So let's say Uncle Bob has smoked all his life, and no matter how well of an argument he has presented about the effects of tobacco, concerns regarding health, his lifespan, etc., he is still going to smoke. Even when you combine an effective argument with a trusted source, like you as a family member, you are not enough to influence Uncle Bob's thinking. Your only hope might be to potentially pose a question to Uncle Bob. Something like, "Wouldn't you like to live long enough to see me graduate from Texas Tech University, Uncle Bob?" This question or assertion might be the only thing powerful enough to get Uncle Bob to reevaluate his long-held belief or habit regarding this behavior. You are, after all, his favorite family member. Now, let's take Uncle Bob's scenario to the extreme ELM model. You've already posed a thoughtful message and integrated facts and figures from health organizations. You've discussed the impacts on the body and the potentially irreversible effects of smoking. You've introduced a highly trustworthy source, like yourself, and appealed to him by asking thought-provoking questions. The last thing you could do would be to play on his emotional state by producing actual tears when conveying your message. Alright, so tears are not an official part of the ELM process, but they do increase the likelihood of elaboration since emotions are powerful motivators. There may be hope for Uncle Bob after all. So what does all of this mean for the future? Mass media influence and human attitudes are continually changing. The evolution of social media continues to connect us with global issues. Voicing our opinion publicly for the world to see can immediately provide reward or embarrassment, and there are plenty of controversial, political, and moral debates happening all around us. Opinions and attitudes, both high and low thinking processes, are complex, changing, shifting, and evolving. New opinions are being continually formed. These will impact policy, law, and public opinion for this nation and the world as a whole. One thing to remember is that we are not simply passive consumers of mass media, and that seeing a message is not enough to get people to change. Today, we voice our opinion, we vote, we share, we like, and we contribute to the message itself. Doing so effectively changes or reinforces that message. We continue to be active participants in our social construct. Whatever happens next, we, our own human behavior, made it happen. Thank you very much for viewing this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. The following are references utilized throughout this presentation.